I never thought I'd end up in a battle with someone who held the keys to my home, literally and figuratively. I'm Daniel Wilson, a 32-year-old graphic designer who moved to Westfield Heights Apartments 6 months ago after landing a job at a local marketing agency. The complex was perfect, affordable rent, close to work, and within walking distance of downtown. When I first toured the place, Mr. Lawrence Fleming, the landlord and property manager, seemed like the ideal building owner. He was attentive, friendly, and even offered to replace the older appliances before I moved in. "I take pride in keeping my tenants happy," he'd said with what I'd later recognize as a rehearsed smile. The first month went by without a hitch. I settled into my one-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor, met a few neighbors, and started establishing my routine. Martha Johnson, a retired teacher in her 60s who lived next door, brought me a houseplant as a welcome gift. Across the hall was Robert Patterson, a night shift nurse who I'd occasionally run into during the odd hours when I was working late on a project. The first red flag appeared during the 2nd month when I noticed my utility bill was nearly double what it should have been. When I asked Fleming about it, he explained that utilities were calculated proportionally based on unit size and occupancy. It sounded reasonable enough, but something in his tone made me uncomfortable. Then came the building regulations update email. Among the typical rules about noise and trash disposal was a new policy. Landlord reserves the right to inspect units with 12-hour notice for maintenance purposes. Previous leases I'd signed typically required 24 to 48 hours notice. When I mentioned this to Martha, she frowned. "He's been getting stricter about everything lately. Just last week he came by to check my thermostat while I was at my doctor's appointment." I started noticing other oddities. Fleming's car parked outside the building at strange hours, maintenance requests from certain tenants, mostly young women, being addressed immediately while others waited weeks, and a strange camera installed in the hallway directly facing my door for security purposes, he claimed. The real trouble began when I came home from work one evening to find my apartment door slightly ajar. Inside, nothing seemed obviously disturbed, but I had the distinct feeling someone had been there. My laptop had been moved from where I'd left it, and some papers on my desk appeared rearranged. I immediately called Fleming. "Did maintenance enter my apartment today? I don't recall receiving any notice." "Yes," he replied curtly. "There was a reported leak from your bathroom affecting the unit below. Emergency situations don't require advance notice." "But everything in my bathroom is bone dry," I countered. "And why was my desk area disturbed?" Fleming's tone chilled. "Are you accusing my staff of something, Mr. Wilson?" "Because I take such allegations very seriously." The next day, I asked the tenant below me, an elderly man named George Miller, if he'd reported a leak. He looked confused. "No, everything's been dry as a bone. Fleming hasn't been by here in weeks." That weekend, I installed a small security camera disguised as a clock on my bookshelf, facing the entryway. It was probably paranoid, but something didn't feel right. 3 days later, I received a notice under my door. "Rent increase effective next month. $200 additional due to market adjustments." This seemed absurd as I'd signed a 1-year lease with fixed rent. When I took the notice to Fleming's office, his administrative assistant, Denise Powell, looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Fleming is very busy today, but he said all rent adjustments are final and in accordance with your lease terms." "That's impossible," I said, pulling out my copy of the lease. Section 3 clearly states, "Mr. Wilson," she interrupted, "Mr. Fleming said he would be happy to discuss this with you, but he's also mentioned that he's received noise complaints about your unit. Perhaps you'd like to address those issues first." I had never played loud music or had parties. This was a blatant intimidation tactic. "Who complained?" I asked. "We keep complainant information confidential," she replied, not meeting my eyes. As I turned to leave, Fleming emerged from his office, looking smug. Housing is tight in this area, Daniel. Very tight. I suggest you consider your options carefully. The following week, things got worse. I returned from work to find a formal warning about unauthorized modifications to the apartment taped to my door. The letter claimed I had installed fixtures without permission, referencing my security camera though not explicitly naming it. How did he know about the camera unless he'd been in my apartment again? The same day, Martha knocked on my door, looking distressed. Daniel, has Fleming been giving you trouble too? He's raising my rent by $250, and when I reminded him that I'm on a fixed income, he suggested I might be more comfortable in a senior living facility. It turned out that several tenants were facing similar issues: arbitrary charges, suspicious entries, and intimidation. Robert the nurse told me he'd been written up for improper garbage disposal after he complained about the broken washing machine in the laundry room. Later that week, I checked my security camera footage while at work using the app on my phone. To my shock, it showed Fleming himself entering my apartment, not maintenance staff. He went straight to my desk, opened drawers, and appeared to be looking through my papers. At one point, he even opened my laptop, though it was password protected. When I showed Martha and Robert the footage, Martha gasped. I suspected he's been going through my things, but I thought I was just being forgetful. Robert looked grim. My prescription medications went missing last month. I reported it to the police, but they just suggested I might have misplaced them. That night, I received an email notification that a maintenance check was scheduled for my unit the following day at 8 a.m. When I would be at work, I decided to call in sick. Sure enough, at 8:05 a.m., Fleming used his master key to enter, looking surprised to find me sitting at my kitchen table. "Oh, I wasn't aware you'd be home," he stammered. "Clearly," I replied. "What exactly are you checking for today, Mr. Fleming?" "Routine inspection," he muttered, then quickly added, "Actually, I can come back another time," before hastily retreating. The situation reached its breaking point a month later. I came home to find an eviction notice on my door citing multiple lease violations, including unauthorized guests, noise disturbances, and property damage. I had done none of these things. When I confronted Fleming in the hallway the next morning, he smirked. "You have 30 days to vacate, or we'll involve the courts. Nothing personal, just business." "This is illegal," I said. "You can't evict someone without cause in this state." "Cause? I have plenty of documentation of your violations. Who do you think the judge will believe? A property owner with 20 years of experience, or a tenant who's barely been here 6 months?" His smile disappeared. "And if you're thinking about showing anyone that little spy camera footage, remember that recording someone without consent is illegal in this state." That was a bluff. Our state had one-party consent laws for recording. But it showed he knew about my camera. That evening, I found Martha in tears in the hallway. She had received an eviction notice too. "I can't afford to move," she sobbed. "My social security barely covers this rent. Where will I go?" I felt physically ill. Fleming wasn't just targeting me. He was going after vulnerable tenants who couldn't easily fight back. Robert showed up minutes later, holding his own eviction notice. "He's clearing out everyone who doesn't bow to his demands," Robert said grimly. That night, I sat in my apartment, surrounded by lease documents, feeling utterly defeated. Fleming had all the power. He controlled our homes, had access to our personal spaces, and clearly wasn't above lying or intimidation. I considered giving up, starting to look for another apartment, when I received a text from an unknown number. Fleming did this at Oakwood Commons too. Look it up. I realized it was from Denise, Fleming's assistant. The text from Denise was the turning point. I spent the night researching Oakwood Commons, a property Fleming had managed 3 years earlier. What I found was disturbing. A forum thread where former tenants described experiences eerily similar to ours: arbitrary fees, suspicious entries, targeted evictions. One comment caught my eye. He selectively evicted tenants in rent-controlled units, then doubled the rent for new tenants. The city fined him, but he made 10 times the fine amount in increased revenue. I decided to start gathering evidence systematically. First, I set up additional hidden cameras around my apartment. Then I created a shared document and invited Martha, Robert, and 3 other affected tenants to record every interaction with Fleming, every suspicious charge, and every unauthorized entry. I also discovered something crucial. Our building had been purchased using a local housing development grant that required the owner to maintain affordable housing standards and follow strict tenant protection guidelines. Fleming wasn't just being unethical. He was potentially violating the terms of his financing. The next morning, I contacted the housing authority and requested information about Westfield Heights compliance requirements. The clerk seemed unsurprised. "We've received a few inquiries about that property recently," she noted, then hesitated. "Off the record, there's an ongoing review of several properties with similar ownership structures." Meanwhile, Robert had begun talking to other tenants, discovering that over 40% of the building had received either rent hikes or eviction notices in the past month. Those who hadn't were mostly newer tenants paying significantly higher rates. Martha, despite her age, proved surprisingly tech-savvy. She had been keeping meticulous records of her interactions with Fleming for years, including recordings of verbal agreements he had later denied making. A week into our information gathering, Denise reached out again. "Check the storage area in the basement. Unit 17B Fleming keeps a second set of books there. I've been making copies for months." When I asked why she was helping us, she replied, "Because he fired my mother from Oakwood when she got sick. Said she wasn't a good fit anymore after 8 years managing the place." Armed with mounting evidence, I took a calculated risk. I submitted a formal complaint to the housing authority, the local tenant rights organization, and the bank that had provided Fleming's development loan. I included video evidence of unauthorized entries, testimonials from multiple tenants, and financial records showing the pattern of targeting specific tenants for removal. The response was swift. Within days, Fleming received official notices from both the housing authority and the bank requesting documentation and explanations for the alleged violations. His first reaction was predictable: escalation. New eviction notices appeared on 6 more doors. Maintenance requests were completely ignored. The building's heating mysteriously failed during the first cold snap of autumn. But Fleming had miscalculated. The collective pressure had given tenants courage. When he stormed through the building, threatening to make life miserable for troublemakers, 3 different residents recorded his tirade on their phones. These recordings were promptly added to our complaint file. The local tenant rights organization assigned an attorney to our case pro bono. She immediately filed for an emergency injunction against all pending evictions, citing evidence of retaliation. Fleming grew increasingly erratic. He installed new locks on the laundry room and claimed it was under renovation. He hired a security guard to patrol the building, not for our safety, but to report on tenant activities. The turning point came when the bank's compliance officer showed up unannounced for an inspection. Fleming tried to delay them, claiming he needed time to prepare documentation, but the officer was insistent. That evening, Fleming was seen removing boxes of documents from his office and loading them into his car. Denise quietly took photos and sent them to me. "He's panicking," Robert observed as we watched from my window. "People like Fleming only know how to bully or run." The next morning, Fleming's office was closed with a handwritten sign. "Office temporarily relocated to main business address." A quick search revealed that address was just a mail forwarding service. 3 weeks after our initial complaints, the housing authority called a mandatory meeting for all Westfield Heights tenants. The large conference room at the local library was packed, not just with current residents, but with former tenants from both Westfield and Oakwood Commons. Fleming arrived flanked by 2 attorneys, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. The smug confidence was gone, replaced by nervous glances and whispered consultations with his lawyers. The housing authority representative opened with a bombshell. Following extensive investigation, we have documented over 70 violations of the affordable housing agreement that was a condition of this property's development loan. Fleming's attorney attempted to interrupt, but the representative continued. Additionally, the evidence of systematic tenant harassment, illegal entry, retaliatory eviction, and falsification of records has been forwarded to the district attorney's office for review. The room erupted in murmurs. Fleming's face reddened as he whispered furiously to his attorneys. When it was the tenant's turn to speak, Martha went first. Her voice started shaky, but grew stronger as she detailed 3 years of intimidation and exploitation. Robert followed with precise accounts of unauthorized entries and missing personal items. 5 more tenants shared similar stories. When my turn came, I presented our compiled evidence. A timeline of Fleming's pattern of behavior, video footage of him entering apartments without permission, and financial records showing how he systematically removed long-term tenants to increase profits. This wasn't just a landlord cutting corners, I concluded. This was a calculated scheme to circumvent tenant protections for personal gain, while benefiting from public funding intended to support affordable housing. Fleming finally stood, his attorney trying to pull him back down. "This is a witch hunt," he shouted. "These tenants conspired against me. They've been refusing to pay legitimate charges and violating their lease terms." The housing authority representative responded calmly, "Mr. Fleming, we have reviewed the original lease agreements and compared them to what you've been enforcing. They don't match." "That's because they've been amended," Fleming insisted. "Without tenant signatures or legally required notification," the representative countered. "Furthermore, the bank has confirmed that your financial reporting doesn't match the rent receipts we've collected from tenants." The final blow came when Denise walked in, carrying a thumb drive. "I have 3 years of financial records showing exactly how Mr. Fleming has been operating," she announced, handing it to the housing authority representative. Fleming lunged toward her. "You treacherous." His attorney grabbed him before he could finish, but the damage was done. His outburst was recorded by a dozen phones. The meeting concluded with the housing authority announcing that Westfield Heights would be placed under temporary management, while legal proceedings determined long-term ownership. 6 months later, life at Westfield Heights was remarkably different. The building had been transferred to a non-profit housing organization as part of a settlement agreement with the bank. Fleming faced multiple civil lawsuits and criminal charges for fraud, harassment, and misappropriation of funds. The new management restored original rent levels for long-term tenants and implemented proper maintenance schedules. The security cameras in the hallways were replaced with a modern system that actually recorded footage. Fleming's had been mostly non-functional, just there for intimidation. Martha was elected head of the newly formed tenant association, bringing her teachers' organizational skills to community-building efforts. Robert led a committee that reviewed and revised building policies to ensure transparency and fairness. As for me, I found an unexpected new path. The tenant rights organization that had helped us offered me a position managing their communications and outreach. My experience with Fleming had awakened a passion for housing justice I never knew I had. The sweetest outcome came from an unexpected source. During the legal proceedings, it came to light that Fleming had been running similar schemes at 5 different properties across the county. At each location, he had targeted vulnerable populations, elderly residents, immigrants, single parents, assuming they wouldn't have the resources or knowledge to fight back. The district attorney's office created a special task force to address predatory housing practices, using our case as a template for identifying similar situations. 3 other landlords in the area suddenly became model property managers when the investigations began. 1 year after our victory, we held a building-wide celebration in the newly renovated community room. The former Fleming tenants from Oakwood Commons joined us, including Denise's mother, who had lost her job and apartment under Fleming's management. As I looked around at the diverse group of people who had fought together, I felt a profound sense of pride. The man who had thought his power was absolute had been brought down not by a single person, but by a community that refused to be victimized. The final irony came in the form of a news article someone pinned to the community bulletin board. Lawrence Fleming, unable to secure work in property management after his conviction, had been forced to move into a small apartment in a neighboring county. His new landlord, a company owned by the non-profit that now managed Westfield Heights. Martha read the article and smiled. You know what they say, what goes around comes around. And in our case, it had come around perfectly. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community, where we celebrate quiet strength, real struggles, and unexpected victories. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.